Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. Um, and I said in the title of this that I get a series of reminders from YouTube saying you have to watch, you have to watch this YouTube short. It's really going to blow your mind. So then I open it and get clickbaited into opening it, and it's Dan Fagella, and I know that if I see something from Dan Fagella, it's going to be a CIA talking point. It's Dan Fagella interviewing Yoshio Bengio and saying, basically asking the same thing, the same question that all of these people ask over and over again of one another about about AI safety, and so what's saying what should we do to protect the world from runaway AI, which is badly framed and ridiculous in the way that it's asked in 100 different ways. Um, um, uh, and Then this is the entirety of the clip, and then Yoshua Bengio, not Yoshio, Joshua Bengio says, just says literally the CIA talking point verbatim about authoritarian governments, and that is so ridiculous because this person has done work in foundational work in developing the thing that is tending to be the focus of these techno-communist conversations, um, machine learning and large language models, and has done so to some degree um, outside of the ways that other, let's say, more problematic people have done it, being working directly for Microsoft or Google. Well, there's nobody doing this kind of work in the West who's not problematic in that way, but seeming less so. But nevertheless, this person's a creature of the West, a creature of the a techno-fascist, essentially, a creature of this military-industrial complex, and the DARPA pipeline, which they think is somehow separate from that, which of course it's not. And they also tend to think that it's not doing this reverse Robin Hood thing, which is basically how the internet itself was developed, right? Um, Using public funds, some semblance of the commons that exists in the West, to develop a thing that could have been transformative to further developing the commons, as I think it will be in the course of the 21st century. But instead of doing that, operating in the spirit of open source and in the spirit of communalism generally, they have done this reverse Robin Hood thing of taking public funds and turning it into private wealth, and then talking about the products of this private wealth in overblown terms. Oh, this is a transformative technological development. Being able to put little funny mustaches and bunny ears on people's faces and with Instagram is a truly transformative development. That's effectively what the most of the things that technophiles describe as important are almost in no sense important. And some of them might be slightly more useful to people than putting bunny ears on, but not really. This is a failing of the entire framing of the conversation about the economic system of the United States, um, um, We will talk about the stock market as if it is the economy and not a vampire actually keeping people from living well. Finance capital is the opposite of common property, and damages all of our chances for having such a thing. And I think of this joke. Um, and every technophile, they're not big bourgeois, right? But yet they have big bourgeois attitudes. I think of this joke where guy wakes up and looks around and realizes that he's tied to some train tracks, and he looks over and there's another guy next to him tied to the train tracks, and he says, "What the hell is going on? Where are we?" He says, "You're in the trolley problem, buddy. There's a train coming, and we're gonna die." And the guy says, "Jesus, I thought about the trolley problem and talked about the trolley problem quite a lot. I always assumed I would be the one pulling the lever." And the other guy says, "Yeah, you haven't been living in reality, have you?" This preoccupation with protecting private wealth on the part of people who are workers, fundamentally, all of these technophiles are workers. They work for someone else. They're not independently wealthy. They're not personally steering some vast capital enterprise or arm of the state that serves in a similar function. Yet they behave as if they are. And it's problematic by the standard of any century, any decade past. But in this world where we have 5 years before we reach runaway overheating because of capitalism's climate apocalypse, wherein human life will no longer, with each passing year after, say, 2029, human life will no longer be increasingly less viable. Humans, to the point where humans will not really be able to survive, and there'll be a multi-billion person loss of life. There is no status quo protection in that in that quandary. There is no conservative. What the fuck is a conservative upholding empire, upholding private wealth and finance capital, conserving in any of that, when conserving that means contributing to your own demise, the demise of your offspring? There is no such thing as a conservative. There are only mental patients, right? And every capitalist, so-called capitalist, those are not capitalists. If you're a YouTuber making a living, or a streamer making a living from talking about just repeating CIA talking points over and over again, like people I'm mentioning, and that's not like this one person is bad compared to everybody else. He's pretty well the stereotypical example. Like Lex Friedman, for example, is a very thoughtful guy. Look at me stroking my chin. But every third word out of his mouth is a CIA talking point of this kind. And sometimes he'll say something that deviates slightly from that reading from that CIA teleprompter, but not in any real meaningful sense. All of these people, they have, if you would define them as a class as having some anti-establishment element, that anti-establishment element would be that they are anarchistic. That would be their one anti-establishment feature. But that's not meaningful at all under any circumstance, but particularly not meaningful coming from Westerner of West European descent, an American or a person from Canada or what have you, anywhere in the imperial core, because that it is basically that same CIA talking point of saying that these not the people that are killing the planet are the authoritarians, But the enemies of the people that are killing the planet are the authoritarians. The people in the global south who have tried to arrange their economies to benefit the citizens there and have been um, overwhelmingly conspired against to see that that doesn't happen by the functioning of all manner of neocolonial um, institutions, so-called institutions, not least of which would be like the World Bank and IMF, putting them into debt traps. You know, this the model that was first a glorious Haitian revolution, one kind of legitimately liberatory action in nation-state history, and then they were forced to accept this first poison pill of the debt trap that was just devastated their economy for literally 150 years, or well over 150 years. But they literally didn't pay it off until the mid 20th century. And people look at that. Empire managers looked at that and said, "Well, that's great work. That's something we can recreate." But couching it in terms of well, people have to pay their debts, right? Everybody has to pay their debts, but they create an institution that in no sense really serves in the spirit of that, and is really only serving for what all of these things do, allowing the extraction of private capital, allowing the extraction of resources from through the operations of empire and finance capital. And so these technophiles, who, if you would say they have as a class this one feature of being anti-establishment, which is interest in anarchism, anarcho-capitalists, well, they would all overwhelmingly be, those people would be anarcho-capitalists, which are not even acknowledged by real anarchists as being anarchistic, right? That's an oxymoron. Anarcho-capitalism, capital exists through the actions of a nation state which protects private wealth in law, and in the absence of that law, there's no finance capital or private wealth, so if you call yourself an anarcho-capitalist, you haven't gamed out the most basic stuff. This is true of just almost any kind of person in the West who calls himself a libertarian. So you have this so-called anarchist thing, which is literally just a lie, like literally just a CIA talking point, right? Because you're attributing to all state formations a problem that is pretty particular to private wealth, finance capital, and the operations of the bourgeoisie. By doing that, the ubiquity of this, it makes it nearly impossible to do anything in the spirit of a scientific socialist project, reform, change of any kind, much less the revolutionary change that could say keep us from all becoming extinct in a short number of years. There's no one more worthless than tech bros. But for some reason, they're given a pass relative to other people with the same neoliberal profile, who would be kind of seen as, well, like, what's a word they used to say a few years ago, cuckservatives. relative to these tech bros who are some kind of dynamos, right? But they're all serving the same function. Not just. I'm going to talk about Kehinde Andrews, a book that I read recently, Back to Black, which I guess I read part of it a few years ago, but now I've read the whole thing again. So not, this he's very critical of Kehinde Andrews is very critical of scientific socialist organizing that's not fundamentally rooted in effective liberation, and then quite critical more so, but that's not the focus of the book, of reformism generally. What is reformist in this framework where 2029 will begin, the 2029 will be the point where the oven is now on. You're inside of the oven. The oven is now on. So the oven's going to keep getting hotter and hotter. I want you to think about circumstances less troubling than that in history. Let's say previous reigns of terror. So the United States or France, this is the term, the reign of terror, talking about a bourgeois revolution that occurred and chaos which followed. The United States had a reign of terror of this kind. It's not called that in the United States. Almost everything is whitewashed in U.S. history to this day, to an extraordinary degree. Think of the circumstances of the reign of terror. Think of other chaotic circumstances along those lines that have occurred in other circumstances, not following a bourgeois revolution, but just generally fucking chaos, right? Were those people in an oven being cooked alive? That's what your life is going to be in a decade or so. And people are not realizing how bad that's going to be. When I said in the last show, Comrade Lenin would never, ever, if he were alive today and knew what we knew, when faced with these three problems contributing most significantly to capitalism's climate apocalypse, the military-industrial complex, number one by far, the United States military-industrial complex and North Atlantic militarism generally, the fossil fuel sectors, which can be almost completely abolished without causing any harm to anyone. China had made single-use plastics illegal in 1979, for fuck's sake, recognizing all of this before it was much of it was even really in common parlance. And the third sector being livestock systems. So if Comrade Lenin were alive today and he said, okay, these are the three things more or less in that order, exactly in that order of importance, that have to be abolished, literally abolished, for humankind not to go extinct. And you respond, well, as a scientific socialist, this is 90% of scientific socialists I've observed. Military-industrial complex, got to go. More near abolition of livestock, fossil fuels. Got to go. Livestock systems. That would make my mummy so sad. My culture. Blah, blah, blah. You're gonna fucking die. You understand? You're gonna be in an oven in 15 years. You're gonna be in a fucking oven. And there's gonna be all of these little crabs in the barrel snipping at you. Relative to the hell you're going to be living in, a small dietary change, or eat a food that tastes exactly the same, but for some reason, because it doesn't have the cruelty, or just every fucking cultural thing that I ever encounter is just garbage, right? What the fuck? You're just making a cultural argument about anything. It's always going to be just nonsense, right? This is my culture. Killing animals is my culture. You didn't even kill the animal, right? So the essential problem is that it's a livestock system of grand scale and destructiveness that needs to be abolished. And for some reason, that is troubling to you, even though all of the facsimiles now taste exactly the same. You're not eating them, you're not encouraging others to eat them. When someone points any of this out to you, you go from being a Che Guevara to being a fucking livestock lobbyist in your language. This is 90% of scientific socialists that I've observed. There's somebody watching this right now with a fucking cheeseburger in their fucking hand, who would say, I would do anything to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse. I would do anything to stop the ravages of finance capital. But I'm not going to stop eating this cheeseburger, though. I'm not going to stop doing that. But again, these are in the order of importance, right? The military-industrial complex and Western fascism generally is the thing to be defeated. But this social democrats, let's say the UK of a century ago, or a little less than a century ago, people who are fundamentally protecting private wealth and finance capital, except allowing some exceptions in a few sectors, and thus calling themselves socialists, which they are not socialists. But those people, were they the worst of the bourgeoisie on this planet, which is funny, right? Those people would be able to do these three things. We got to get rid of military contractors and massive standing up fascistic armies. We have to get rid of fossil fuels. We have to get rid of livestock systems. They'd be capable of doing that if they had. But they're really fundamentally not capable of doing that, right? Because they take the side, when it comes down to it, they take the side of finance capital. And that's why there's two kind of people in this world. Sorry. It's a false dichotomy. But there's two kinds of people in this world, right? There are the socialistic-minded people who are willing to concede that finance capital and private wealth need to be dismantled and abolished. And then there are the people who, when prompted with that problem, even in knowing that it will kill them, hem and haw, change the subject, come up with some bullshit rationalization. Those people are not capitalists. Those people are fascist sympathizers, right? Only a small number of the people who fit that description are capitalists, right? They own a factory, something in that order of magnitude, right? The rest of them are fascist sympathizers, capitalist sympathizers, bootlicking dogs who wouldn't take the smallest action to save their own life in the face of being cooked in an oven in 15 or 20 years. Kehinde Andrews' book is incredible, and I am kind of a student of works related to liberation. There's no view of this continent, for example. There's a literal sense in which a native person, irrespective of their viewpoint, an African American person, irrespective of their viewpoint, if they live on this continent, they are by nature, essentially, by that circumstance of their birth, more naturally a leftist, irrespective of the level of Project Mockingbird propaganda that they have been brainwashed by or not, more naturally a leftist than anyone else, right? Because in that world, a just slightly better world, where fascists are not in charge, where there is a humane and sustainable economic system in place in North America, those would be the people with citizenship, right? Those were not the violent invaders who never should have been here at all. Those are the people who either were here or whose ancestors were brought here against their will, and thus throughout were not actively participating in the genocides, the elitism and cruelty of the system, which has only evolved ever so slightly, you could say, in the ways that it's evolved, it's not evolved to be better, but just to have more plausible deniability in the violence it's done, specifically to those groups, Native Americans and African Americans, specifically to prevent this institutional and public consensus conclusion but from being reached that these are the people who actually should be in charge of the government exclusively, right? Can't. And this is something that's fundamentally pointed out, not in those words, by Kehinde Andrews in Back to Black. It's something that's a big blind spot for scientific socialists generally, that there is no Marxism without liberation being front and center institutionally and ideologically. The point that I'm going to talk about here now is generally the point of this program, which is that doesn't mean anything. Kehinde Andrews' correct analysis of the world doesn't mean anything if we don't transform this world by 2029 dramatically. There's no just view of anything on a planet where humankind is extinct, a dead planet, effectively. It would have been as if all of this had never happened. It would be less relevant to talk about this than it would be relevant to talk about the justice for Neanderthals against the Cro-Magnons, or some thing from distant antiquity that was probably very relevant at the time, right? That's not a very that's not generally the way to talk about these things, but that is the situation, nevertheless, that we are facing if we do not dramatically transform things in this 4 to 5 year time frame as described. And that is why I talk about advanced computing on this program, because it is the one thing powerful enough to bring about that transformation in that time frame. It's the most powerful tool for change in human history, and it's if wrested away from these kinds of seemingly low-key fascist sympathizers like the technologists and technophiles I've described, and placed in the hands of the people, it will be the most powerful tool for revolution in human history. But to harness that power, we have to have a coherent revolutionary program, and that, like I mentioned, I talked a couple of shows ago pretty specifically about this idea of trying all of the people in the United States who do not fit that description of being a person of mainly Native ancestry or mainly African ancestry, which I am not, either of those. Trying them in absentia, not to strip them of material necessaries or of their very lives, as the bourgeois system does to those people, as I said, specifically to prevent any of this from happening. Murder, creating conditions where social murder of the hundreds of millions, or rather about 100,000 or more a year, are killed. Their lives are cut short. So this trial in absentia would rather be to strip political rights, such as they, so to speak, from the European supremacist, who doesn't think of themselves as a European supremacist, in the way that I said, even the scientific socialist doesn't really generally abide by these ideas articulated by Kehinde Andrews in this book, um, um, to allow the building of a humane and sustainable economic system that is capable of protecting uh, the historically marginalized and today marginalized to a high degree, just with those layers of plausible deniability built in, a person. You can't have that. You can't have a system. This Manning Marable and others writing in the 50s or 60s about how we almost every black Manning Marable African American, almost every African American scientific socialist recognizing that we need a scientific socialist revolution to protect humankind generally, but that if that occurred by the standards of the scientific socialist institution of that time and today, that would not necessarily be an overwhelming positive thing for Native Americans and African Americans, because that institutional bias today, algorithmic bias, even more potentially insidious, that institutional bias would really prevent the creation of a genuinely equitable system. And that's so something like recognizing in law in this world. This is a world where finance, capital, and private wealth are already a thing of the past. And you now have the United States true revolution, a communist revolution has occurred, and you now are determining what is to be done to see that everyone is taken care of. One of the most important things that you would do is what I've said. Make sure that the European supremacist institutions nullified by something like this trial in absentia. There might be less dramatic ways to do this than a big kangaroo trial, but nevertheless, that would have to be what's fundamentally done. There's no socialist in the year of our Lord 2024 without being an eco-socialist, right? You got 5 years, less than 5 years, to transform the system. If you don't say that to people, if you turn away from that in any way, you're a liar. You're effectively lying. You're also doing a disservice to yourself, because it's the only argument that nullifies the conservative capitalist worldview, right? What is being conserved? Again, what is being conserved by upholding empire and private wealth, when doing that will kill you, is literally going to kill you, be baked in an oven. What the whole argument breaks down. But scientific socialists are often not centering the conversation on eco-socialism. And so this is what I would say, a book like Back to Black has to have some title and focus of what is said. So this shouldn't be seen as a criticism of Kehinde Andrews' work overall, as so much as a response to what else could be said in this context, which is namely, capitalism's climate apocalypse is going to kill us all, and advanced computing is the one thing powerful enough to transform institutions in that time, in the time we have left, to see that occur. Which is a thing that I say constantly. Both of those two things are things that I say constantly on that show, on every one of these podcasts. Contextualizing it here in the context of this book that I just finished should come as no surprise, but I would be remiss if I didn't also add some, criticism of Comrade Andrews is, what's the program, buddy? Such as it is a criticism. I would be remiss then if I didn't describe the program a little bit, which is this thing that I call the AI agentic class, which is capitalizing on something that's unique to this time in history, the emergence of large language model chatbots, which are transitioning from being merely just broadly useful writing assistants, helpful in academic writing, which really is anything, and helpful in, say, computer programming, some more specific disciplines more so than others, transitioning from that to being a more legitimate AI agent, which all of these folks, Shabengio, folks in these high-end labs in Google and Microsoft and elsewhere, OpenAI and elsewhere, have access to a thing that, if released on an open source model tomorrow, could be transformative in that way. And they're sitting on it. You say, Google, people would say of Google, why didn't Google just develop something like this? They had the advanced computing models to develop something like ChatGPT, and part of it was the not necessarily recognizing the applicability of this thing that can do academic writing as being useful to people, not necessarily recognizing that was a thing that could be done. And part of it would, according to Google, would just be a fear that the chatbot generally, as it happened with Microsoft's Tay and others in the West, would just be do something ridiculous and be seen as a pest, and then there would be a loss of market share rather than gain of market share for them. But of course that's a lie, right? Those kind of minor controversies are something that tech companies like Google are experiencing on a quarterly basis or something. The reason why it wasn't done is because all of this, the creation of the internet itself, was a thing that was done through this reverse Robin Hood mechanism. But there was think tanks and advertising PR firms, all manner of PMC and empire managers of every kind, all putting their heads together to say, how do we turn this thing, a technology that is fundamentally communalistic in its operation, connecting people, allowing them to work together, into something more neoliberal, far-right capitalistic. And they managed to somehow do that, a dumb thing that no one should have done, over the course of the 90s, 2000s, 2010s to today. This fundamental problem of this large language model, which would immediately be able to, something that would pretty quickly rather be able to be, even if all of the things that developed were proprietary, people would be pretty able to quickly be able to have an open source clone. And there are open source companies, so that's not even necessary. But it's almost kind of mind-boggling that even that the fascist West even allows the open source LLM development to occur at all, just as it's kind of mind-boggling that the internet came into existence at all. That was something like, I guess in the 80s, right? This is being developed as a centralized military tool. And then college professors, people like this, were like, hey, what if it was actually for people? And then once that started to happen, there's only so much that these empire managers can really do to stop that from happening. So this incredible coup on their part of transforming this into a neoliberal monstrosity that is tech today is pretty impressive, really. But it just goes to show that if you just spend trillions and trillions of dollars on evil, you can do evil, not stop the presses. So the reason that Google was not developing this is simply because the threat to private wealth, finance, capital, and empire there was recognized. The inability to monetize it without it being a threat to those things is the only thing that tech people, tech pros, technologists, and the tech-minded really care about, right? They all have this some kind of performative, anarchistic, libertarian kind of thing. A lot of them do. It's the majority of those people. But at the end of the day, that has really nothing to do with what they would actually do, or really much to do with what they say. The only thing that they care about is helping to maintain empire so that they can kind of suckle on that dark petite, or just doing it just for the love of evil, right? And most of these technophiles are not rich, don't even have, wouldn't can scarcely even be called small bourgeoisie, but they're just doing it for the love of evil. So this is something like that could have been done by Google a few years ago. Was the point? Releasing something like a ChatGPT, but again, any number of companies, a good deal smaller than Google, have in their laboratories things that could be released tomorrow on an open source model, and through a small PR campaign, be used to build this thing that I would call the AI agentic class, or agentariat. And the model that I have described on here has been that this open source large language model with enough of these agentic qualities to be able to operate insightfully and semi-autonomously is downloaded by yourself if you have a computer that has a GPU on it, as far as 2024 is concerned. And then you have to do very little work other than that. That's why it doesn't require that you become a scientific socialist to participate in such a thing, because it doesn't even require that you really be awake or that smart to participate in such a thing. It only requires that you can click on something that allows you to download this modified open source product, and then connect it to the network, which could all be done automatically without any real work on your part, and then have it run for some period of time, and then a certain number of people doing this, and also helping to steer, and other people who don't have the right kind of computer could still be doing work to help maintain and build this thing, or could still, at the very least, be doing what the minimal GPU user of this would be doing, which is responding to a couple of emails throughout the course of the day. What do you think we should do with this project? Yes, answer yes or no. And they click yes. It's a click-through process. Nevertheless, this person who doesn't even really need to be awake would be capable of doing work of a quality that no one on Earth is right now capable of doing. Namely, reforming, as the thing grows to a certain size, reforming the economic system, changing the nature of the base, the Marxist base, and effectively becoming the superstructure. If you're not familiar with base and superstructure, just, I don't know, look it up yourself. So this would become quite quickly become the reality of our world. In the near term, it could be used with a few thousand people to spearhead projects that could be seen to be noteworthy, or could transform a cityscape, and thus would actually be noteworthy. I contrasted two kinds of projects. For example, these 100,000 or so agentariat group working to develop and build a desalination plant in San Diego. I said Lagos. Now I'm saying San Diego because it's kind of close. In San Diego, but So then that finally gets built a couple of years later, right? That's after 2029, the point where the oven is on, the point where you're all being cooked. So it's nice for people being cooked alive to have a bit more water. Um, there, you can see how there's a bigger problem there, though. So then you do things with this network that are more uh, um, more justice focused and could be perceived as more performative, like what I've described as the Book of Names, wherein every human being on Earth is rated by their culpability in causing capitalism's climate apocalypse. So obviously, if you work for a right-wing think tank or some kind of CIA cutout, a military contract or things along these lines, you're rated very low. You're being recognized as the war criminal that you are. If you work for or are vested in fossil fuel outfit, you're rated very, very low, recognized as the war criminal you are. And people say this to me all the time, man. Oh, you have this poster that has your face on it. It says something about the AI singularity in the context of scientific socialism. But don't you know that scientific socialists cannot have an identity, cannot be? It's like there's no possibility of doing anything in this world that's not public facing that would affect change. It's not no possibility. There's very, very few options there. Almost all of the options would involve actually like talking to other people and trying to change things. So a person who just says that's virtue signaling, anything that anybody does, that's virtue signaling. I mean, all they're really saying is, I support this ecocidal status quo, and I support myself being cooked in an oven in 20 years. That's all they're saying. They're literally saying nothing of interest. You won't find any of these technophiles who don't kind of tend to employ that sort of language. You won't find any liberal person, any capitalist pig who doesn't kind of employ that language. Again, the only thing that they're saying is, I am an elitist, and I do not want to change anything. I support this status quo, which is not merely problematic or unbelievably cruel, as by the standards of decades past, but ecocidal, suicidal. You are suicidal if you support this. This clock is ticking on capitalism's climate apocalypse. We need to act with imagination. We need to act with swift decisiveness. We need to speak to one another to the urgency of this. And we need to speak to one another to the power of advanced computing as transformative in this area in a way that almost nothing else is even in the same ballpark, to something that allies scientific socialists and those close enough in that thinking to be called allies do not say. The only people that say this are tricksters, just neoliberal tricksters, singularitarians, right? Who have no interest in transforming anything. Just their only real interest is in kind of using this trickle-down economics kind of technobabble to corner the market of this conversation that should be had, wherein the scientific socialist is saying AI is a revolutionary tool. But in the public imagination, the only people that's come close to saying such a thing are just literal fucking cops. Just literal fucking fascist sympathizers in PMC. And so no one else even asserts this fundamental truth, because it's just something that's associated with the most laughable personality you can imagine. But by harnessing the power of advanced computing responsibly and aligning it with the principles championed by someone like Kehinde Andrews in Back to Black, which I highly recommend, and these principles generally of scientific socialism, which is rooted in racial justice through the building of genuine material conditions, not in ways that are merely liberation themed, as Kehinde Andrews talks about a lot in his book. But by this specific focus, we can create a future that is not merely seemingly technologically advanced, not able to just put bunny ears on people's heads in Instagram and talk about that kind of phenomena as if it's somehow helping, somehow an important part of an economic system, which is really mostly what tech is. But actually, the genuinely transformative AI as a revolutionary tool being used to create, first and foremost, a sustainable and then materially adjust, which requires racial equity, an end to all of these systems of plausible deniability where harm is done to underclasses, racialized underclasses, other underclasses, without really seeming to do so. Right? That's a reason why you could say the UK was, in a certain sense, in the 20th century, in almost every other sense, being as bad as the U.S. in that time frame, but in a certain sense, a social democracy, whereas the U.S. was not. What is the difference there? Well, the U.S. was pretty focused on making sure that, laser focused on making sure that those two groups, Native Americans and African Americans, were not able to assert their correct position of being the rightful owners of all of this. And so the best way to do that without triggering greater and greater escalations is through social murder. And so not having a public health service, not having a housing authority, doing all of these things where you can kind of squeak by with doing a tremendous amount of harm to communities without having, and just say, oh, it's just the system, capitalist realism, it's just the system. It's not just the system. When 100,000 people die a year, as they do in the United States, because of a lack of a public health service, when 70 other countries have a public health service that is quite easily managed, that's not just the system. This is every aspect of capitalist realism is, of course, a lie. But we can build this future where advanced computing empowers us all to live in a survivable world before capitalism's climate apocalypse absolutely crushes us, bakes us in the oven. So let's work on that. Reach out to me. Tell me what you want to do to begin to build this agent target network, and that's what we'll do. I can talk about this stuff because I have a writing assistant that's able to kind of keep me a little bit on track with organizing. It's not quite as simple to keep the thing coherent. So I need your help. Thank you.